Parker.
And my name is Ned.
And this is the Force Unlimited, yet another Star Wars Unlimited podcast. This is episode number 7. We're recording January 21st. I don't have a bit because we've got to get to work. Last episode ran pretty long, and we have 2 new recurring segments this week. So we're going to dive right into it. Ned, tell us about the match that we just played to get warmed up for our podcast.
It was a mirror universe mirror match in the sense that one of us was wearing a gold lame vest. I will put it to you to determine which of the 2 Krennics was the one in the gold lame, but I was playing Aggression Krennic, trying to take advantage of some of the new cards, most notably Power of the Dark Side and Occupier Siege Tank.
Does the gold lame get me the goatee? Because if so, then
Yes.
I will wear then I'm the gold lame.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I was green Krennic.
Yes. It was 2 pretty good matches.
2 games.
Yeah, two games. Dose.
We're going to try to
game-ups.
switch up to best 2 out of 3 as the recording gets faster. The games can take longer.
Speaking of games that took long, boy, that second game that went. We had like 12 cards left in deck at the end of that
Yep.
particular.
I think we were starting to discover that the TTS mod is not designed to have as many resources as that game took. It was not convenient to have 13 resources. So,
Yeah,
but I wanted to be able to, play my 8 costs and my overwhelming barrage in the same turn, and I feel like I'm entitled to do that.
Yeah, no, and you did, and I think you were very successful. It was the first game was not even close. It was just I ran away with it. There were a couple of misplays that whatever. The last game, I had you at 24 health for several turns, and you kept drawing into your outs.
Yeah, and honestly, I had an out in my hand, and that I feel like that second game. My takeaway from the second game is just the power of initiative. It's such a nice, simple mechanic,
huge.
but it really that's where so much strategy lies. It was, absolutely nail biting because you're just playing that. Okay, so I'm gonna, so then he's gonna, then I'm gonna, and trying to figure out. Okay, that back prepare. Trying to think a certain number of moves ahead. When is it worth seizing the initiative and just staying one step ahead? And I misread the initiative, and next turn I was dead. And that's exactly how the game should play. So that one was an absolute delight. Yeah,
no, wonderful game. Occupier Siege Tank did not wow, but I don't know.
It's a single aspect common. I believe the consensus. I agree with the consensus that single aspect common units are, for the most part, usually if they're not already not worth putting in your deck, that is a constructed deck, that is an intentional double negative. If they're already not worth not putting, then they will soon be worth not putting in your constructed deck. They're just waiting for a little bit more. No, if that's your takeaway, that the siege tank did not siege enough. Siege was Sag. I think is a good takeaway.
Yes.
All right.
It looks fun. All right, let's go.
We got a new segment. This one's called Mini Monday.
I shall call him Mini-Me.
Mini Monday is just like My Name is Monday, except for I started. You see, Mini Monday, My Name is Monday is something that when Ned gets to talk about what Ned wants to talk about. But Mini Monday is our chance to ask follow-up questions or look for corrections, or in this case, just address new information that's come to light that maybe requires a slight acknowledgement without re-delving into all of the math. So at the end of the last episode, in last episode's Mini Monday, Ned talked about how many cards do you need to have in your deck to ensure that you have a successful fishing trip. And it was a good talk. And then right at the end, because I have a tendency to write the script and then go off the script, I asked Ned, hey, what would happen if you were in limited and you only had 30 cards in your deck? And if you're drafting, and how many vehicles do you need to have in your deck to make Wedge worth it when drafting? If you're looking at it, one of your last possible picks is Mon Mothma in the last pack. How many Rebels do you have to make Mon Mothma something that you think about? And that would have been an easy question for Ned to answer if I had asked it, say, an hour before the episode, but I didn't. I asked it
Lord.
right before we closed out. So, Ned, if going quickly back through the list of cards that we discussed last time, how many cards you need to have in your deck to make a successful limited fishing trip? I'm going to list them. You tell me the number. We'll go nice, fast, little back and forth cadence. Recruit Mon Mothma.
13.
All right. Takeoff. Prepare 14. For takeoff. 14.
14.
Vader for 3s.
7.
Only 7. Okay. Vader
Only
for
7.
1s.
13.
But those are just guidelines because those are made up numbers. Realistic Vader.
12.
Okay, so you got to have in a 30 card deck, you're drafting Vader, you have to have 12, 1, 2, or 3-ish. That's a benchmark.
I mean, a lot of these seem a little bit aggressive, but
yeah, well, if you want to make it hit, right? We're going for 95% chance of hitting on the turn that it's played. You're playing Vader in turn 6, best case scenario. You've already churned through over a third of your deck in limited.
Yep.
So that tracks.
Yep.
Tarkin is 20?
20.
That seems...
Because he's looking at 5 and he needs 2. Tarkin was really aggressive in the larger deck size case as well. But that's, I mean, just the card itself is a hard fishing expedition. You're looking at 5 and you need 2.
Right. So that's not that he won't hit. That's you need a lot to get maximum value out of Tarkin.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you need to have a very dense deck. Okay. And that covers the cards we talked about last time.
Okay.
But it gets more fun because just to pour salt into the wounds, about 8 hours after we recorded, Fantasy Flight revealed Jabba the Hutt. And Jabba the Hutt, another fishing card. It goes fishing for tricks. But what I love about it is that it was one that doesn't map to the existing math. The Search 841 is something that we haven't seen before. So, Ned, in Constructed, if you're building with Jabba and you want to have and Jabba can drop on turn 3, you want to have a 95% chance of dropping Jabba on turn 3 and getting maximum value, which in his case is 1 trick. How many tricks do you have to have in your deck?
15.
Which is impossible. So it is impossible to get a 95% chance of max value.
Currently impossible.
With Jabba. Currently impossible.
Right.
Obviously, by set 9, we'll have decks that are Jabba and 47 tricks. Okay, now if you're playing Jabba Unlimited, how many? 9. Okay, that is
9.
Actually possible, but
doable.
somebody would have to
I'm
be
not sure
feeding
that I'm
you
not
a lot.
running. Yeah, I'm not sure how many waylays I'm willing to run. And
In limited,
yeah,
as a delay tactic. So okay.
Yeah.
That clears up last week's My Name is Monday. That's why we called this one a Mini Monday. Today, Mini Monday. Today, we're going to get into our main topic, which is starting with 2 resources. This one is, on the one hand, kind of a small, shorter topic, but I think it still merits discussion because it's kind of different. It's one of those things that, like, I think putting peanut butter and jelly together where it's just, once it's done, it seems obvious, but until it's done, it's invisible. Nobody thinks of it. And then as soon as somebody thinks of it, it's like, well, why didn't anybody think of this before?
Yeah.
And I'm confident somebody has done this before, but that acceleration into the second round on the first round. Now, the number one effect of it is obviously everybody talking about this game is incapable of mapping the number of resources they have to the turn they've played. So it's constantly referring to, okay, well, you play this on turn 6. Actually, you could play it on turn 5. All right, you play this on turn 8. Oh, actually, you could play it on 7. So that's my favorite part is that the game's been revealed now for 8 months and people are still just referring to resource number as round number, which is true in almost every other game, but not this one.
Yeah, no. It breaks. I have to have like a little specific bit of code everywhere because I always forget. And it's not exactly correct, exactly trivial because 1-cost cards you also play on turn 1.
Right. So, okay. Well, let's talk about that. So, So 1-cost cards are something you play in the beginning of the game. 2-cost cards are now also something that you play in the beginning of the game.
Yeah.
When we were talking about quadrant theory, we talked about the power of the opening, the importance of the opening. I have to assume that the Fantasy Flight devs have thought long and hard about the opening. I've been following the ARCS Kickstarter very closely, near and dear to my heart. And Cole Worley's Design Diaries have talked about the power, the importance of like opening turns in a game to establish the nature of the game. Ned, I know you are more than an
Amateur?
armchair game dev, less
Yes.
than a published game dev. I think is as much as we
Currently,
can and
to,
should
to
say.
date, today, yes.
Today, yes. Oh no.
Yeah. Yeah.
I absolutely believe I will have known you when, but I want you to tell me. You've commented about opening turns. I've heard other designers and design diaries talk about opening turns. I don't care about opening turns. They're just something you have to get through to get to the good stuff of the mid-range deck. So that's they're just
No,
they're
no,
like,
no. I understand your perspective, but I want to set the table here. So the opening turns are a really tough problem to solve, where you have, in my opinion, three.
as a
big
player or a
considerations.
designer. They're
As a
tough
designer,
tough problems to solve as a designer. Okay.
you have three big problems. Number one, most of the time you're starting from a semi-symmetrical position. Now, some games like Cold Whirly games, they do a lot about like establishing asymmetry in the early game, either because you have like very asymmetrical setups or you're playing very asymmetrical factions. But in the vast majority of games, everybody kind of starts off at the same place.
But even in Star Wars Unlimited, you've got
Yeah.
people. I mean, we're starting asymmetrical, but at the same time,
Yeah.
the board's empty. We have four
board is
cards in
empty.
hand each.
Yes. Yeah.
2
So
resources
you-
each, right? So everything's
Yeah.
symmetrical except for the potential powers in deck.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And you want that symmetry to break very rapidly because that's game texture, right? Like if I'm playing something and then you're playing the exact same thing and we're not playing a mirror match, and that happens repeatedly because like, oh, this is obviously the best turn 1 play. Oh, this is obviously the best turn 2 play. You need something to break that symmetry very rapidly. Or else you get like a lot of mirror decisions that are generally not fun. They can be very interesting, but yeah.
So in our match, the matches that we just played,
Yeah.
which was the first time you and I have played, we've played mirror match before, we've played aspect match before, but I think that was the first time we have played same leader, different aspect
Yeah.
of base, and that was really that was fascinating. But again, those opening turns where we're both playing Inferno 4. You know, it's like, well, you do your thing, I do the exact same thing. That feels rote, even though we had never played that matchup before. It just felt, you know, I've goldfished this deck enough that I'm like, okay, well, then you're doing the. I'm not learning any new information, right?
Right. Yeah, and Inferno 4 is also this really like again. Probably I'm digressing here, but the Inferno 4 versus Inferno 4 and Krennic matchups is really interesting because normally if you want to be the beatdown, you might want to, if you think about like the beatdown versus control, the beatdown wants to attack the other person's base, the control wants to attack into the other person's unit. But even if you're the control, you don't want to attack their unit, because if you attack your 2/3 into their 2/3, it will not die, and now it has an extra point of power, so you've given the beatdown player like an additional point of power to beat you with.
Yeah, and when I said it didn't provide any new information, I mean, like, obviously Inferno 4 provides 2 cards worth of information. I meant that you playing Inferno 4 didn't tell me anything about your deck. You playing Inferno 4 is, you're playing a Krennic deck. I feel like, I mean, you know, please get at us in the comments if we're wrong, but at the current state of 213-ish cards, if you're running Krennic, you're running Inferno 4. It's just good info, good filtering to get to the later game. So there's no new information. That was awful. Okay, so you start off in some degree of symmetry in the opening turn. You want to break that as quickly as possible.
Right.
That's problem 1. Problem 2. You said there were 3.
They are frequently repeated positions. And by frequently repeated positions, every single game you will see the opening. You might not see the end game every single game because somebody can win before you get into the end game state, which, you know, questions about end game. But realistically, like, if you die at 5 resources, you did not see the end game. But you're always going to see turn 1.
And there's only so many cards you can for other games. Hearthstone, Runeterra, Magic that have 1 resource on turn 1. There's only so many cards that you can put in your deck, and only so many cards in your deck that you can play on turn 1. Okay.
So you're very frequently going to see the exact same positions over and over, and that can be really interesting to people who like chess. But we're playing smash it up Star Wars clickety card game here.
Minor anecdote rant that I never get a chance to make, and is almost unrelated.
This is the platform. Go for it.
But this is my platform, right? This is our platform.
That heart,
So I played WoW, World of Warcraft.
Yes, as did many of us. Thank you for escaping, by the way, Parker.
Yeah,
I have known some casualties. Yeah.
I didn't actually not play. I do not have the temperance to run through the same stuff over and over again. I do not have the heart for the grind, but it always boggled my mind. And I understand intellectually, but emotionally, it always boggled my mind that so much effort was put on the end game, where you were probably going to have, I mean, grinders, obviously great players, people who are committed, are going to have many characters in the end game, but you're really going to, at the time, mindful, this is before Cataclysm, this is,
back in
no
the Dawn
expansions.
Ages,
This is vanilla WoW. It always boggled my mind that so much effort was put at the end, and I was like, you know what? I'm leveling 4 different alts, and I'm having to run through the same beginning content. Why are we not putting out more beginning content? Why is that not getting more variety? You see it more. I realize intellectually I'm wrong, but emotionally it always just made me frustrated. But I think that's you see there's only something, I was running no 1-drops, so I had 3 cards in my deck that were 2-drops. Those are the only 2 cards I can play. That's 9 possible, 3 possible cards, 9 possible instances of the card. So okay, so we're gonna see the same openings over again, which is boring.
Yeah, it can be boring, right? Like, you can have texture and nuance to it. And then the third thing that's a challenge is that you need to have it matter, but you can't have it matter too much. Like, if it doesn't matter at all, then that's not an interesting decision, and you're failing in the game designer's goal of making a series of interesting decisions. If nothing ever happens,
everything needs to be interesting. Everything,
ideally,
I mean, ideally, right? But every act you are taking, and the great thing about paper games is that although the downside, they're physical acts. You are taking a piece of luxury cardboard from your hand and putting it on the table, and
turning it sideways.
Turning it sideways. If you're doing that and it's not a result of an interesting choice, then, I mean, solitaire has a lot of that, right? Like there's a spectrum of solitaire to ideally perfect game, and so okay, so you want to make sure that
it to matter.
Because if it doesn't matter, then it's boring. But if it matters too much, then it just is terrible to have it decided in the first.
Right.
I remember Urza's Winter, right?
Right. Combo winner. Okay. You played the card on turn 1, and especially, excuse me, this is especially troublesome because in the early game you have made the fewest game decisions, right? Like in the middle
the loss
and
feels
later,
terrible.
Yeah, the loss feels terrible, right? Like you made one choice and that choice was wrong, and
or it was right, and you're just playing the bad deck, right? Like
losing in deck building is never like a good feeling, and that happens, and that's something that we experience as card gamers. But it's
I mean, that's why I love playing grindy control, because even when I lose, I made 500 decisions, and there's plenty of rich points to go back and say, right there, that's where I lost, and that's where I lost. Like a sad timeline through history.
Yes.
So. Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, like, that's why a lot of people like playing more controlling shells, is that you tend to get a lot more decision points.
Okay, so the opening is hard.
It's hard. It's a hard design problem.
So we have to assume then that starting with 2 resources solves at least one of those problems without exacerbating anything else, or the net positive.
Yes. In my opinion, it does. And how it does is actually kind of interesting. So let's look at point number 3 in detail. Point number 3, again, you want it to matter, but you don't want it to matter too much.
Okay.
So when you're drawing your opening hand, you have seen the fewest number of cards that you ever will in your deck, right? Like, depending on whether you mulligan. So you cannot make it that you will lose the game if you do not have a card on turn 1. Or... you can make it so that you are behind on turn 1, but generally you don't want it to be the case that if somebody else has a turn 1 play and you don't have a turn 1 play,
that's it.
That's it, right?
It should put you on the back foot, but not cost you the game.
Yes, right. And so there's a tendency you want to make the first turn worth of plays small, right? Like, it should put you on the back foot, but generally not completely blow you out. And you have this additional challenge in that 1-cost cards show up everywhere. And what
do you mean by show up everywhere?
So when let's pretend that you're running a deck of nothing but 1-cost cards.
Okay.
On turn
that sounds
1,
like my son, but okay.
Yeah,
sure.
And we're playing a 1 resource per turn game where you're starting on turn 1, right?
Okay.
On turn 1, I play 1/1 drop. On turn 2, I play 2 1-drops. On turn 3, I play 3 1-drops, right? And if my 1-drops are pretty good, then no matter what turn of the game it is, I have 1-drops that will fill up the entirety of my curve, depending on like, the number of cards you have. Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Okay.
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But let's pretend that we're now dealing with 2-cost cards, right? Like if you fill up your deck with nothing but 2-cost cards, on turn 1, you can't play anything. On
Okay.
turn 2, you can play something. On turn 3, you can play a 2, but you're leaving a resource on the table. On
Okay.
turn 4, you can play 2 2s, right?
Right.
So there is this natural tendency where if you have a deck that is made up of things that are not ones, to try and spread out your costs, right?
Okay.
If you're
And
running
this is
nothing
just
but
looking
twos,
at your cost curve. Right.
just looking at your pure cost curve, right?
Okay.
Is you are leaving resources on the table if you are playing nothing but 2s or nothing but 3s or nothing but any other number than 1s. If you're playing nothing but 1s, you are guaranteed to always be able to fill up the entirety of your cost curve, given cards.
Giving cards.
So the fix as a designer is, okay, turn 1, turn 1 with 1 resource. You got to make it matter, so there has to be 1-cost cards. You can't have no 1-cost cards, or else you're not making a decision on turn 1.
Right.
So one.
If you're looking at
threat,
Death Star Stormtrooper, like
Yeah.
that, or,
Yeah.
or Greedo, that's a
Yeah.
in a 1-resource game. Like
Yes.
that's something that a game where you start with 1
Yeah.
resource. That's a reasonably terrifying opening
Yeah.
to stare down if you can only answer with 1-cost cards.
Right. So you need to make 1-cost cards be okay, especially 1-cost threats. Right? 1-cost threats need to be profoundly kind of okay, because otherwise you just run a deck full of 1-drops and
Right.
you're fine.
They
You
need
know,
to
one-
be very, very, very answerable threats.
Yes.
Yeah. So they have to do something, otherwise nobody would run
Right.
them.
Right.
But they have to do little enough that people are incentivized to move beyond 1-cost cards.
Just playing 1-cost cards.
Okay.
So, the answer then is that if you look at a lot of other games, I, for example, took a look at MTG Goldfish, looking at Standard, and a significant percentage of the decks run no 1-cost units. We're looking at like a good
This is in Magic.
40% of the Magic.
Right,
A good
okay.
40% of the metagame in Standard right now runs no 1-cost units. Why? Because they're right?
And so you might, it's just not worth.
Yeah.
The downside of drawing them later is
Yes.
so high.
Yes.
That even to just round out a turn 3 where you have a 2 and a 1 is terrible.
Yeah. You
That
would,
it's
you
better
would rather
just to
just play a 3.
Skip your first turn
Yeah.
and move on.
Yeah. And,
Okay.
in Magic, bunch of things, we're not going to get on that sidetrack. But the Star Wars designers, the SWU designers, they had a very interesting observation. And that very interesting observation is most games are balanced around 2-cost units as being like your standard thing that you're drawing everything in comparison to. The bears, right?
Oh, you're
So,
saying in
yeah.
in many
Yes.
games,
In many
the
games,
2-cost is a good evaluator.
a good evaluator, right? Like
Okay.
a 2/2 for 2, that doesn't matter in SWU because the stats are slightly different, but like on the order of like a 2/2 for 2 is a good thing to balance around. And so why don't we just skip turn 1, right? Turn 1-cost units, they are this problem. You either have to make them bad or you have to make them not necessarily meaningful. A lot of decks aren't going to want to run 1-cost units. We want to try and balance our games away from having a lot of 1-cost card filtering or a lot of 1-cost answers. We don't see any at all 1-cost answers. The 1-cost card draw that we see is Recruit, which is not a card, like it's card selection. It's fine.
Okay.
So
do you think some of the
instead-
problem around balancing 1-cost cards is the lack of discrete variables, right? Like there's just
Yes.
the dial is so
Yeah,
low
the dial
that-
is chunky. Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like putting it to
Yeah.
2 is doubling its resource cost. Putting it
Exactly.
0 is making it free, so you can't even go plus or 1, minus 1.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So, when you're dealing with very small numbers, you don't, and you're not able to deal with fractions. It's troublesome. So the answer that the SWU designers came up with, which I think is an excellent answer, is we just skip turn 1. We go straight to turn 2. Turn 2, you're going to play a normal unit The 2-cost units are what we're kind of going to use as our balance. We're going to kind of balance around. We understand how dangerous a 2-cost reasonably statted unit should be, and then we just go from there. And people are naturally going to tend to have decks that have more than just 1-drops, because you don't have the same turn 1 advantage where you get to play something and the other person gets to play nothing.
And I think that tracks in that.
Yeah.
In almost every other game I can think of, blowing through the first turn doesn't feel great.
Yeah.
But is to be expected. Like, it'll come up. It's not insignificant chances of that occurring. I feel like in Star Wars Unlimited, skipping your first turn like feels really bad.
Yes.
I mean, again, it's not determinative. It's not deciding, but it still feels really bad to just walk into, okay, I've got nothing, I've done nothing, and now I'm on 3 resources. That just feels like you're already approaching the mid game. And I believe one of the developers said that 3 to 5 resource costs are those like slightly pushed cards to make them playable against just playing more 2s.
Stuff. Yeah.
You know, or holding out for like 6 pluses. So like if you're not doing anything until you have 3 resources, it's like, well, okay, I've done nothing. You took the I took the initiative. Now I'm going to try to play a 3, but you're coming back with Boba, right? Like we're already into Boba. If I do nothing, the game is well underway. So okay.
Right. So to go back to those 3 initial problems, so it doesn't solve the issue that you're starting from a semi-symmetrical position. I mean, leaders and bases kind of do that, where they produce this asymmetry starting on turn 1. But that's not part of the 2-resource system. But the symmetry tends to break right away because you suddenly have a choice. You don't have to just play a 1. You can play a 2. You can play 2 1s, or you can play a single 1, or you can play nothing.
Right. Well, and not only that, but because the resource spread for a 2-cost can be higher than the resource spread for a 1-cost, you're going to get even further into just weirder, different cards, right? Like I feel like you look at so many 1-costs in Magic and. Or in any games, like a 1-cost is just
it's a 1/1 or a 1/2 with an ability,
like looking at Runeterra, so many 1-costs are the good stat with this faction's keyword, or the bad stat array with this not with a keyword that's not of this faction. Like they tend to be a very narrow band. So you're getting into 2 resources. Now we're in a broader band. Okay. Okay. So that so it solves 1, or at least accelerates us to the solution to 1.
Frequently repeated positions, you are still going to have pretty repeated positions. Like look at the Inferno 1 versus Inferno 1 matchup.
4.
But because thank you. Sorry, Inferno 4. But you
what I do.
You are going.
That's why I'm here.
You are going to tend to because you have more options, because you have 2 resources. The space of possible opening positions has opened up, right? Like it's like if in chess on turn 1 you suddenly got to start with one of your minor pieces advanced.
Right. Sure. Right. Yeah. No. Exactly. And so now you're already you're going to fewer repeated positions just because the symmetry is breaking faster.
Right.
So
you have more. The space is bigger. You have fewer repeated positions, and then needing to matter but not too much. This I think is going to be an interesting question, because I think that having
going to be implies that you think we don't quite have the answer yet.
I don't know that we have the answer about whether or not they're too dominating. Like I've seen really strong Sabine aggro decks, and I don't think that they're dominant, but they are non-trivial. And again, you want to make sure that the early turns matter. But to your point about not being able to play on turn 1, putting you on the back foot, I think that there is going to be as card pools get deeper, each resource gets more value associated with it. And so if you're wasting 2 resources on turn 1, where you've got like the maximum possible downstream impact, I think that's going to be increasingly strong. But I have faith in the designers, and I feel like this is something that they know about and they've talked about when they have been designing cards. And so I'm interested in seeing how it goes.
No, I think I'm far more terrified of a Sabine left unanswered than I am of a Greedo or R2D2 left unanswered.
Right.
Okay. But where does that leave? Let's talk about one cost, okay?
Yeah.
Where does that leave one cost? I mean,
I
I'm
think it
not
leaves them in a really weird place, honestly.
okay. I mean, because they essentially just become like curve toppers. They become
Right.
things you put in your deck if you're not Tarkin or Luke, or if you don't have a one cost sink.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, if you're Tarkin, if you're Luke, if you're Vader, and you have the one cost sync, you can make an argument for you do like a one, and then you get your leader ability worth of value. I
Yeah,
think
I
Death
mean,
Star
I find that
Stormtrooper
that argument, I guess, is
Vader.
compelling
Yeah,
for the opening turn, but
yeah,
almost that's the only turn that I care about it, and I kind of
yeah.
rather just play a two cost. I'm saying if you get to one resource shy of playing on curve.
Yes.
Tarkin has a built-in solution. Luke has a built-in
Yeah.
solution.
Yeah.
Jyn Erso does not have a built-in solution, and so you want to have a one in your hand that you can just use to top off. But
I mean, yeah. I mean, I think that is one of the big problems. If you're not playing a very aggressive deck, the ones are just not very attractive because okay, you're going to fill out your curve with them, but how many times are you going to draw them when you have like an actual 2, 3, 4 setup and there's just no room to kind of slot them in? Maybe you can slot them in on the later turns depending on the way that your deck is structured. Um, but I think that fundamentally the question of one cost units is an open one about, you know, I like playing Greedo on turn one. I feel like when I play Greedo on turn one, I'm in a happy position. But I don't like playing Greedo on turn one and nothing else. And if I'm having to play like Greedo and something else, then that implies a lot about the structure of my deck. That I have an honestly.
well, and you've just dumped
really,
50% of your
yeah.
hand in your
Yes.
opening hand. Your opening turn, you've just dropped
Yeah.
2 out of 4 cards. Your opponent
Yep.
optimistically has dropped 1, and
Yeah.
you're going into the next turn 4 to uh, uh, 4 to
Three.
5 options,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that just that starts to cascade that difference
Yes.
of a card, I think.
Right, and I think that they've balanced the one cost. A really common stat line that you see in one cost units is 2-2, and a really common stat line that you see in two cost units is 2-3, and that means that your one costs basically never have advantageous trades into two cost units. Notable rare exceptions: Death Star, Stormtrooper, Greedo, etc. But they have their own foibles.
Yeah, I know we will get there at some point, but it's really
Yeah.
kind of fascinating to me, given that we have less than one set, and so
Yeah.
looking at the curve, we know that 2 aspect cards are worth a little bit more than 1 aspect
They
cards.
tend to be.
Unique cards are worth a little bit more than non-unique cards. There's
They tend to be. Yep.
and so we've got Death Star Stormtrooper,
Mm-hmm.
3/1, vanilla.
Mm-hmm.
We've got but 2 aspects.
Yeah.
We've got Greedo, 3/1, 1 aspect with text, non-vanilla.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Not a amazing ability, but it does more
Sure.
than nothing. But he's unique, and not only is he unique, he's iconic, right? Which
Yeah.
I think, gets us into. I don't know how that's valued, and I don't know that we'll ever be able to run a My Name Is Monday on iconic uniques versus non-iconic.
I mean, keep dreaming. I think that there are.
Well, it's
There's
also
not
kind of a
enough
hard question.
examples. Yeah.
There's somebody out there
Yeah.
who has like a shelf full of Veer's paraphernalia, right? Like somebody out there with like 4 Dodonna shirts. So it's hard to say who is truly iconic. There was somebody on Twitter the other day complaining they went to Star Wars, and I mean, people are always complaining on Twitter. They went to
Sure.
Disneyland, and there's Hondo is an animatronic character, and they didn't know who Hondo was, and they're like, "Man, this is terrible. I don't know who this person is. You're supposed to make me care about people." Meanwhile, Hondo is my son's favorite non-Force user in the entire Star Wars universe. So, is Seventh Sister, is Fifth Brother, are they iconic, right? But clearly, like Luke,
Yeah. Luke is
Darth Vader, they're
yeah.
iconic. So unique has additional value, but unique
Yes.
on a certain level is an escape valve, right? This is a cool
Yeah.
ability, but if we allow you to stack 3 of them, you're gonna have a bad
It's
time.
a bad
right?
time.
Like
Yeah.
3 Veers would allow a trooper deck to be, yeah, I'm dropping my 6/4 Death Star Stormtrooper for one,
Oh
right?
Lord.
Like
Yeah.
that just becomes
No, yeah.
so it has to be unique
Hmm.
mechanically. But then there's also the value that like Luke Skywalker just has to be cool because he's Luke Skywalker. Boba Fett has to be pushed because he's Boba Fett. And
Yeah.
they've talked about their design decision that they don't want the game to be between random Ewok plus weird repair droid versus some weird death stick purveyor comboing into some random shaman that's like on some lost
Parker,
right.
don't threaten me. Don't threaten me with a good time here.
Right, I know. They,
Yeah.
I mean, they're not opposed to combos, but they want the
Yeah,
they
sure.
want the combos to be these cool characters, and so one's reach should exceed their grasp, right? So let's get to heaven, and one day we'll run a poll. We'll reach out to some people. We'll have them divide all of the unique characters into iconic and not iconic, and
Yes.
I don't know. I can't say anybody's not iconic because there'll immediately be a comment being like, "How dare you besmirch my favorite character?" But right, there's iconic has to be some
Sure.
extra unique oomph, and I feel like we don't quite have enough data points because I'd really love to see a one cost double aspect unique, which I don't think we have. I don't think we have, and I want to know what that looks like. What does the double aspect and unique get us at one cost, right? But until then, yeah. So I think ones are a necessary evil. You put them in there because
Yes.
the pool's a little small. You're looking around out a curve, and you're playing somebody who doesn't have a sink, which
Yeah.
is non-trivial number of people. But I think Vader's going to be prevalent. Luke's going to be prevalent. Tarkin.
I think Tarkin. Tarkin's ability on Tarkin when I've played against it has been more significant than I've cared for.
My take on Tarkin is that he will probably be better than people are expecting in constructed, largely because he has an Imperial keyword, which means
Yes.
in a way he's not evergreen, right? You
Mhm.
can drop Jin or Cassian or Director Krennic into a deck consisting entirely of High Republic characters or sequel characters, and their ability fires off just fine.
Perfectly. Yeah.
But we've seen that once you get past Mando, we're into New Republic versus Mace's Republic versus Rebel. So, Tarkin, Leia, Hera, the ones who are keywording off of specific keywords that are not,
Eras,
in
yeah.
a sense, evergreen.
Yeah.
Like, I have to imagine that this is not the best they're ever going to be, but this is the best this is the best cycle rotation for them. Because there's not going to be probably a ton of Imperials in the Twilight of the Republic third set. There'll probably be a couple in the same way that we have New Republic now. We have a Separatist now, but there's not going to be a ton in set 3. So Tarkin's Imperialness is near as this is his prime time.
Yeah.
So I have to imagine he's going to be good. But anyways, I digress.
Yeah.
He has a built-in sync.
Yeah.
Still, okay.
Mhm.
But the most value, I mean, once we get to turn 5, last thing I want to talk about on this.
Yeah. Yeah.
We get to turn 5, we get to turn 6. We don't care about turns. We don't even care about 2s, really, right? Like,
No.
if we're in round 6, I'm not looking for 2s. A 2 is sad.
No.
The only
Yeah.
2 that I'm even not disappointed to see is
Regional governors.
Inferno 4. No, Regional Governor's an answer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Inferno 4 just is allowing me to cycle to more. I was always happy to see that card. But turn 2, right?
Yes.
3 resources.
Mm-hmm.
Am I interested in playing? I mean, is a 2 and a 1 as good as a single card that costs 3? Because
I mean,
a 7 cost versus an 8 cost is basically the same. Not exactly, but close. So a 7 plus 1 versus an 8, you're within
You're within spit. So I will tell you, like, if you just look at raw stat points, if we put everything else to the side and you're looking at just raw stat points, a 2 and a 1 have more raw stat points than a 3. So like a common stat line for a 3 is a 3-3. A common stat line for a 2 is a 2-3. A common stat line for a 1 is a 2-2. So you've got a 2-2 and a 2-3 against a 3-3. So if you're just looking at raw stats and you don't care about anything else, then you can make that argument that a 2 and a 1 is better than a 3.
But it's costing you 2 cards.
That is the hinge of this question. Is do you expect that you are going to run out of cards? Because if you are, you start off with 4 cards in hand, you're drawing 2 cards a turn. On turns where you're resourcing a card and you're playing 2 cards, then you are losing one of your sort of initial card. You're going down in your sort of resource bank. And I think that a common question for aggro decks is going to be, can I kill them before I start drawing dead? Before I start not being able to spend down my initial bank of cards?
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I mean, I think
for
that
a
was, like, for
yeah.
example, in tonight's matches, that was, in the second match, that was definitely a point of pain, I think, for you, was I was at a resource
Yes.
level where I could draw Vader and Overwhelming Barrage with my 2 cards and play both
Yes.
of them. It wasn't even providing
Yes.
me with a choice. It was just,
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
go. Yeah.
so.
Right, but you also paid for that in like not cards, right? Like I resourced up to 9, I think, and you maybe 10, and you resourced up to what, 12 or 13?
12 or 13, yeah. Yep.
So I had 2 extra cards to play with, and I think that we were both down to very few cards in hand in the later turns of the game. But if we imagine like some hyper aggressive Sabine against a more mid-rangey kind of deck, as a Sabine player, you're going to be trying to empty your hand, right? You want to use, if you're playing aggro, the essence of playing aggro, the essence of being the beatdown is I want to use all of my resources as quickly as possible, as efficiently as possible.
Okay.
And so playing a 2 and a 1, I think, makes a lot of sense if you are trying to be the beatdown because you are just getting more stats on the board.
So you're thinking this
whether
is
or
almost
not-
something to
yes.
be hoping for, design, deck building towards.
I mean, I think it really is going to depend. But if I'm looking at a Sabine deck, or I haven't seen like a really remarkable dark side aggro deck, but I'm somebody at me with like a really remarkable dark side aggro deck. But
I don't think the tools are quite there yet.
yeah.
They might
Yeah.
be, but I suspect this is what Josh is talking about when he says that one set meta is. They've given aggro to mostly to heroism. They've given control mostly to villainy,
Dark side.
and
The
they both
ability,
get to fight
yeah.
over the mid range. And
yeah,
so okay,
but
so that
I think
that's our opening, or that's
Yes.
that's our opening segment. That's about
Yeah.
opening segments. I don't have
Yes.
anything more to say about it. Do you want?
I think that it's going to be really interesting to see how it evolves. I think that the interaction of draw 2 and then starting at 2 resources means that you get to mid game a lot faster, and that the mid games you get to, you have a lot more resources. And so seeing how aggro players make good use of this to kind of for free get in there and cause some havoc.
I'm glad you qualified that,
Yeah.
because at first I was going to say I think it's going to be interesting to see how this evolves. Could literally cap every one of our segments, right? Like this game.
Sure. Yes.
I mean, the thing we're both pumped about is that the whole is a lot more than the sum of its parts, and
Yes.
there's a lot of room, and there's a lot of hints at things to come. So okay, that's our main segment. New recurring segment. That's not how the Force works.
That's not how the Force works.
I had wanted to call this mailbag or something, but I mean, we're the Force Unlimited, and I have a sneaking suspicion that given our level of competitive skill and yet our willingness to take hard stances, we're going to get a lot of people telling us that we're wrong. So most of the mailbag, at least right now, 1-for-1, the mailbag is that we're wrong. And Ned, I've been out there trying to spread the gospel of math the good word of Ned, and I am getting crucified. You know, and I'm a terrible advocate.
Those Romans
for math, as somebody who stopped really caring about it mid high school. But we've gotten a lot of interesting comments. When I went out and I said that math shows that schmigration shows that
Oh boy.
that power is priced twice as much as hit points. You know, not theoretically, not value, but all other things being equal, we can only measure so much.
Yeah.
That ignoring keywords, ignoring body text, just looking at the cards, running them through the math, that the results we're seeing is that if you were to randomly predict, if you knew how much power or how much resources tomorrow's preview costs, right? We're getting 8 a.m. Pacific, we're getting a new card tomorrow morning. Yes. If I knew how many resources it cost and I knew it was a unit, you could give me a very good guess of the possible spread.
Yeah, and I think that that's universal. Is, you know, is it a 2-cost unit? It's probably going to be a 2-3. It might be a 3-2. It's much more likely to be a 2-3 than it is to be a 3-2. You know, if it's got a weirder stat spread.
All other things being equal, 3-2 is better than a 2-3 by.
According to let's first address the substance of the statement.
No, you address the substance of the statement.
No, I mean, I think that when you are looking at the math, it is a descriptive tool and not a prescriptive tool. Descriptively, it is saying that the designers are costing power more aggressively than hit points. Like that is what essentially the regression is saying to me. Whether or not power is worth more than hit points, that's an open question.
That's more, you know, I'm years of legal training have left me almost completely incapable. Note right there, almost completely incapable of making an unqualified statement. Like, and I mean, you've been my friend for years. I love my wife. I love my children. Those aren't rising inflections on question. Those are me searching for, are there other statements I am willing to make that I would not like qualify in some way just in case I'm wrong?
Yeah.
Like that's so I was very clear that. Yeah, right. This is why our podcast takes so long.
Yeah.
We should just be bolder. Okay, so there's a lot of, I'm out there saying, you know what, this is not, we're not evaluating worth or value. There are better YouTube channels, there are better podcasts.
Right.
If you want to go see people who are really amazing at the game, who are able to look at a card and say, is it good? Is the stat worth it? That's not us. We're just saying, here's what the math shows. And again, dear listener, I think this is a key point to note, is we're not trying to understand this necessarily because it makes us better players. We're trying to understand this because we think it's interesting, right? Like we're trying to understand the nature of the universe. We're trying to understand how things work, and we may, we may spend many episodes exploring something, and at the end of it be like, oh, that was fun exploration. Well, how does it make me better at the game? Oh, how does it make me better at predicting what cards are going to come? I don't know. The best case scenario I can think for listening to us, if you don't already find it interesting, is that you want to make custom cards, right? Like, here, you're really into making custom cards. Here's some. We'll give you more math of like. We'll eventually reverse engineer the designer's guidelines for how many cards are things. But like, right.
So yes. So, but I think that this is really an interesting note, is that generally the designers have guidelines, but if historical card game information is anything, it is people are willing to not only disregard these guidelines in a sufficiently compelling case, but also time has ways of changing perspectives on guidelines. About
and I also think, it's been really fascinating. Tyler Parrott has made think 2 or 3 comments about cards saying, yeah, if we made that card today, it would be like this. That this card doesn't have this trait,
Yeah.
but it would. Or we'd be more aggressive about not including this trait. I think it's mostly about traits. But a deeper they've been building the game for years. We're looking at not their first draft, but the first draft they were willing to publish. And, I mean, they're still developing.
Right.
So, yeah, I can imagine moving. But we've called this, that's not how the Force works, because people need to tell us they're wrong. And we need to actually get to what the people are saying. So I've got a couple comments from Peanut Gallery, from dear listeners. My favorite one right here is Ned, WTF you smoking? And from the
wow.
And
wow. Oh, man. I'm really glad that I'm not hanging out on the
everybody's
Discord.
like clamoring for you to get in there. I'm like, no, that's why I'm here. I'm here as his representative because, right.
I
you
refuse.
wouldn't survive long.
I refuse.
So
Categorically refuse.
But shout out, Ned. You and I were joking on Twitter earlier today, but I really want you to be in the Space Arena Ground Arena podcast league. One of the requirements of being in that league is that you be in their Discord. And it is a civil and friendly place filled with good people.
Okay.
I don't think
All
you
right.
will get crucified, but I've done
I'm a
no
wilting
justice to your
flower
reputation,
here,
Ned.
Parker.
I mean, there's nobody more zealous than a recent convert, right? And I'm 7 episodes now into discovering math, so I'm out there, man. But we actually had a really good
It's good.
comment,
It's good.
and I'm on the fence about reading the whole thing. I'm actually going to probably put it in the comments. But Kale, Kaile, from Discord, kind of noted that they were concerned you were complicating the formula. That they noticed, they actually went to your GitHub. So this is why I told you start cleaning it up. I was like,
GitHub.
Ned, you got to clean it.
GitHub.
People are reading it.
You can look at it. You can argue with me. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
No.
They were noticing that
Yeah.
you were feeding into some of your formulas your assumption that power is worth
yes
2 times the HP, and I said,
yes.
well,
you
have to have
adjusted. Yeah.
No, the best way.
I got that. Yeah.
You know, I speak on behalf of the 90% of our listeners who don't keep up with you, and I want to make something clear. Actually, sorry, Kale, I'm going to get to your point in a moment, but this is not a math branded YouTube channel. I want to be real clear. The Force Unlimited is about myopic conversations, yes, but not all of them are about math. That seems to be where we've been spending a lot of time. That's not who we are. And also, I want to acknowledge, Ned, thank you for dealing with me, because I know in your day job you do math, and a lot of it, and it's pretty complicated.
Yes.
But my understanding is you talk to 2 kinds of people at work.
Arguable.
Other people who really understand your math. And so when you're quibbling with other experts who are quibbling over very tiny details, and you can argue about it, but you're all very informed with many degrees and years of experience in math. Or you're explaining math to business people who are paying you a lot of money because they trust your math, and they're not going to actually ask you to explain basic math. Okay, so
that's where you're wrong, Parker. I've had a lot of experience trying to do this.
I'm right. I mean,
yeah. No, do not. Never apologize.
You've got plenty of experience doing this. So, mindful that we're not a math podcast, and mindful that Ned is very comfortable explaining math to people who don't understand it, and yet are questioning him. So,
I don't know how successfully, but I do. I do frequently.
You didn't start with that assumption that there's only one output variable allowed in a linear regression model, but any number of inputs.
That's correct.
So you started with cost in the stats. Yes. You got some values, and then you went back to stats into cost.
Yep.
Now, that part I tracked.
That's correct.
How did you get to the 2 power 1/8 is powers worth twice HP as an input variable? How did you get to that ratio?
So again, we're going to go back to, we started off, we were treating stats as just total stats fitting against cost. We got a pretty good fit. It wasn't great.
Again,
was
when
pretty
you
good.
say fit, this isn't prescriptive. This is saying I've made a model of what I think it should be, and here's all the little dots of what it is, and look how closely the dots follow my little wobbly line. Okay.
Correct. Right.
Okay.
That is what is meant by a fit. Is essentially we use the machine to adjust our coefficients. So essentially we take our input variables, we assign them each a numerical value, and then we to determine the output. So like for example, if we're regressing stats into cost, what we're doing initially we start off with cost into stats, where we have as our input variable cost, and then as our output variable total stats. So essentially we're adding power and HP together. That was the first attempt that we did. And then we attempted to regress cost against stats, and we got something that fit reasonably well. So that is, we take some variable times cost plus some fixed value, and then we get like a rough stat guideline.
But so then when you pivot to where you're inputting not stats, but power and HP,
Stats.
are you just, and hit points, are you just
hit points
wobbling around until you find a good fit?
I mean, that's how. What do you mean by? I guess wobbling around is an interesting point of view. So what we're doing is we're running a linear regression. So that means that the machine is essentially trying to fit a line.
So the machine is essentially saying, well, okay, we're going to start with power is equal to HP, and this is the fit.
This slope,
and what if we try 1.1 to 1, 1.2, or 0.9, or okay.
Roughly,
and it's going to wobble around the ratios kind of until it finds one that it's
minimizes the error.
And so when the model,
it's trying to minimize the error.
Is,
so that is.
And I'm sorry, I'm butchering your entire profession and life's work, Ned.
No, it's quite
wobbling around those values. It got pretty close to a 2 to 1 in terms of best fit. And and we're up to 213
that was the best
cards
fit.
Now. You feel like that's holding up?
Yep.
219.
I mean, so the general rule of thumb is 219. The general rule of thumb is that you probably want on the order of 100 observations per variable. And so I was, that is not a hard and fast rule, but as like a kind of rule of thumb, 10 to 100 observations per variable is going to get you in good standing. You can go with fewer, and this.
So we've got 130
point,
units.
There things that we've talked about are. Yes. On the right order, I'd like more, but we're, and to this point also, this is one of the reasons why we have to be really parsimonious. Is one of the things that we have like a pretty good intuition on is, and as you were mentioning before, Parker, 2-aspect units tend to have better stats than 1-aspect units. That unique units tend to have better stats than non-unique units. But when I do this regression, we're having to treat each of these variables as like a separate thing.
Oh, you're saying so we don't have enough
regression. And so we need more observation. We need more observations to be more sure about it.
So you're saying, okay, so people are seeing us
when I
compare
run it with
one aspect non-unique unit with a 2-aspect unique unit, and are saying, well, these are clearly not related, and because we don't have enough data points, we are treating them as essentially interchangeable, because
if they're the same cost, they're treated
linear regression on say how many aspects versus we just got to how much. Don't spoil the next segment, but
I have tried.
But I mean, you just got to space tax, right? So here's how much, but then does the model get better?
Yes.
So you're saying we can get more and more inputs.
Yeah.
And so hypothetically speaking, we're in set 5, and we have 1,000.
Yeah.
No, that's not 500. North of 500, 600, 700 units. We're at a place where we can start. You're inputting into the model hit points, power, arena, and uniqueness, and you're just going to keep layering the number of inputs. Yes, but. And this is where we get. This is where we get into when we start layering in more and more variables. When you're dealing with a traditional linear regression model, you're assuming that all of the variables are independent. That's one of the kind of core ideas behind linear regression. But when a lot of the variables, the value of those variables is not linearly independent. So, for example, putting overwhelm on a 1 the
power
value
unit,
of overwhelm is
Well, is it varies with what the power is. So if you're having power as another input, these aren't truly independent. And so the way that you have to handle this is that you have to have an interaction term, which means that you're adding another term into your model that's essentially like overwhelm times power, right? So you don't just value overwhelm at a single value of like, is
Right.
it overwhelm?
We
or is it not?
value
You value it instead at
an overwhelm
you know,
on 10 more than we value an overwhelm on 1.
right. So you need to have an interaction term that explains that, or you move to a nonlinear regression model. So linear regression has this assumption about independence, but you can move to other modeling domains where you don't have to make those same kinds of assumptions. The downside about these kinds of models is they tend to be much more opaque. One of the beauties about linear regression is that we can like open up the hood and we can see the machine thought that like power, the coefficient for power came out to about twice the coefficient for HP. That's an interesting result, and we can like make inferences from that. But if I'm pulling out like a random forest or a neural network and I'm throwing the cards into that, we can't open up the hood in the same way and say, okay, machine, how much do you think that a point of power is worth? Because that's not like a meaningful question.
But
to
then
these
what?
kinds
Sorry,
of models.
what question would you be asking then?
Given a unit with a set of characteristics, what do we expect?
Oh,
the
and it's just
cost
going to
to
look
be?
at.
So we're
Oh,
just
okay, so
answering like the naive.
It's going to run. You would run like a
Yeah.
neural network model to just map over all of the cards, and then you could give it some random custom card and say, how much should this cost? It'll tell you how much it should cost. We have confidence in
Yes.
the underlying math, but you're not going to get a why.
Yes. Yes. And this is one of the challenges about more complex models, and one of the reasons why I'm trying to stick with linear regression for as long as possible, because you can look at the why and you can interrogate.
So you're saying eventually I'll just be able to say
Right.
because,
and that this is
and then like 3 exclamation points.
well, but that's not satisfying, right? Like, but that's not satisfying, and that's one of the reasons why I'm going to lean away from doing that, except when we start moving into more abstruse domains, right? Like we might be saying, we might have some like nebulous, we might be trying to predict, for example, is this card likely to show up in a tournament deck, right? Rather than predicting cost, we're trying to predict, is this card likely to show up in a tournament deck list? Or, and that's the variable that we're trying to predict to, and we like feed in all this stuff and then it might spit out. Or another example is, given this set of other cards, which card, when we add it to this set of other cards, is going to give the maximum likelihood of we're essentially like trying to guess deck lists.
I'm actually really excited to find
like if I give you 40 cards, can you predict the next 10 cards that are going to show up into this deck list?
solved. Okay, I'm actually really fascinated and curious about mismatches between, say, go grab all the content creators tier lists, how they rate cards, but then look at tournaments and say which ones are, or like which ones do just tournament people who are playing say are bad and yet keep showing up in tournaments. And
right, and this is one of these things where the machine is not going to solve anything, and I know that we're kind of going long on this, but one of the challenges about doing statistical modeling is that you have to have a certain amount of underlying understanding of the material, because the machine is dumb, right? And to the point, I do take people seriously when they say, Ned, you're being ridiculous, when you're comparing like a 3-2 versus a 2-3. Is a 3-2 strictly better than a 2-3? I mean, I think that is arguable to the machine's point of view, where we're doing this kind of adjusted stat regression. The machine is predicting that a card that is a 3-2 is likely to be slightly higher costed than a card that is a 2-3. It is not like a full
I think
point
that,
of
and I think
cost,
that's the key thing, right? Is that is that the machine, the math gets to just work with, decimal points in a way that Fantasy Flight does not. Fantasy Flight has to say that a card costs 2, or a card costs 3, whereas if a 3-2 is budgeted with a given set of keywords is budgeted 2.4, and a 2-3 with the same keywords is budgeted 2.1. Well, then yes, the 3-2 has costed more in a very real sense, and yet, well, they're both they both round to 2, so that's the cost in terms of the game. So.
Right. And then the question about like which is better goes into these questions about that are broader scale, that are not necessarily currently machine answerable, or that the machine, like building a machine to answer these questions would be an enormous amount of work.
Get to work, Ned.
You know, like
no, get to work.
I know I'm going too long.
Kale, Kylie,
I
didn't even fully read your
Whoever
question.
you
but,
are,
thanks for actually taking the time. We are I'm going to keep pressing Ned. I don't 100% understand the math, but I am perfectly happy to put his feet to the fire until,
Please email.
Yes.
Email. We have an email address. It's thefoursomeunlimited@gmail.com.
and we will
yes.
keep answering. And
I am happy to have like an extended conversation with you about my approach, because I feel like what I'm doing is well within the bounds of scientific rigor. I'm not p-hacking anything. I'm not just like throwing random spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. We're taking like a step-by-step approach where we're doing our best to understand things, but just because we understand things doesn't necessarily mean that they are advantageous.
You say that, Ned, but we just talked for like 10 minutes, and not once did you address or acknowledge WTF you smoking. So I'm going to ask you a different question, Ned. What's your name?
My name is Monday.
My name is Monday. I'm a mathematician.
Ned, I love My Name is Monday. You don't get one in episode 8, so make this one count. We're going to write a long, detailed script. You can have one in episode 9, but this is not becoming a all math all the time podcast. However, I think we are getting enough cards that we can actually start answering good questions. So what are we talking about today?
Some interesting questions. So we're returning to that stat regression problem where we're trying to fit to the cards that we have some additional features. And we know that these additional features are meaningful, but on the other hand, we also haven't been able to evaluate them before. So the 3 things that I'm considering in this regression that I was not considering previously are damage, bonus stats, and draw. So to go through, damage is when a unit comes into play, does it deal
your
damage
Imperial Interceptors and your
another unit?
Palpatines.
This
Okay.
Exactly. You know, this I extend to other things as well, and this is where we're going to have to, I'm going to call something out, and that is, unfortunately, the way with math is that it tells you everything exactly, but you have to turn everything into math to get it to tell you exactly. And in order for us to be able to say meaningful things about cards, we have to use judgment. We have to say, if we treat each unique case as its own thing, then we have this underlying, we are not going to be able to answer the underlying question. So I think a clear example of this is fishing cards. Each fishing card is its own unique ability, right? Like Jabba mathematically is different than Mon Mothma, is different than so-and-so, Tarkin, whatever, Vader. They do different things, right? But they all kind of draw you cards.
Sort of. Or draw and play.
Sort of.
Yeah. Right.
Play. Right. And I think that when you're trying to evaluate these cards, you have to either look at the commonalities or look at the differences. And to the extent to which you are able to account for things having commonalities, that's good. But it also makes that your approximations cruder, right? Like the machine is going to take exactly what you say and is going to run with exactly what you say. So to this point, we are reaching the realm where I am no longer able to call out all of the specific caveats. So I will ask.
So when you say caveats, you're saying something like Taggy comes into play. He can put in up to +3 +3 worth of stats.
Right. How much is he actually?
Right.
Should we value that at +3 +3? Should we value that at +2 +2? Should we value that at +1 +1? You know, like obviously if Taggy is coming in and giving +3 +3, then Taggy looks like 5-ish cost worth of stuff, right? Like 5 power and 5, not 5 cost, but he's coming in at like 5 power and 5 HP worth of stuff.
Right, but sometimes you're playing him as a 2 cost 2/2.
If on the other hand,
which is really bad. Okay, so
right.
to the point.
Bad.
So you're going
Right.
to be making some assumptions about how likely you think this is going to
Yes.
play out. Those are in the GitHub. We'll put a specific link to the file directly for those who aren't familiar and comfortable exploring GitHubs.
Yes.
So I'm actually going to ask, this is feedback that we would very much welcome, is call out the assumptions. You don't have to, you don't have to actually understand math.
Yeah.
I certainly don't. Ned's been messaging me with, how often do you think Taggy fires, right? Like, how often does, but better players than we will probably have a better instinct of how much do you expect in a given game to be able to get Taggy to fire, to get Academy Walker to fire? Like, how many, when you're dropping these cards, it's a range of possible value. Is Palpatine dealing 6 when you play him? Or is he only dealing 4 most of the time? So, and unfortunately, that's the truth, right? You have to have an average. You have to pick one value and say it's worth this.
Yes.
And do it not just math, but into a very specific.
So, like,
because ranges exist in math. You're saying, I have to say that this is the scenario where this is played when I run the math. Okay.
Yes. So, for example, like Yoda has a when dies trigger, right? That draws you a card. Is that worth a card draw? Is it the same as Vanguard Ace? Vanguard Ace draws you a card when it comes into play. Are these the same?
I'd say that they're both worth a card draw, but are they worth a card draw? I mean, right now so you're saying right now you're just saying the card is worth 1 card draw.
They're
but
both
when
worth a
you
card draw.
remove the temporality,
Yes.
a card draw now is better than a card draw later.
Right. So Vanguard Ace is probably worth, like, the card draw on Vanguard Ace is probably worth more than the card draw on Yoda, but the technique that we're using doesn't allow for that. It says, are we
I am
drawing
partial
a card
to
or are
putting
we
2
not here,
lightsabers
buddy?
on
The answer is, I guess.
entrenched on Yoda. He never dies. He's worth 0 card draw, right? He's immortal. So. Okay. All right. So we got damage. You said there were 3: damage and bonus stats. Bonus stats, I think we've covered with Taggy, and draw.
Stats. So, right, and then draw. So I'm also counting fishing cards as draw.
That's mostly true, but Vader is our first fishing card that's not draw.
Yeah. So I'm treating Vader as being a draw 2. That's not accurate. I'm just treating it as that way for purposes of getting things to kind of work here, because
eventually we'll get to see. Maybe it'd be nice.
It's better than a draw 2.
I'm envious of the data. I mean, I don't think we'll see it, but I'm envious of the data that Flesh and Blood players can have, Magic players can have with digital clients, where you can actually pull up and say, hey, how often? What does Vader on average fire at? I've recorded 1,000 games. How much value am I getting out of Vader? So,
let's go. Right, and I think that we're also, in the event that we have like a digital limited client, you can answer a lot of really interesting things about cards when you look at limited games, because the space is both broad and constrained, where you're seeing a lot of games with exactly the same cards. Anyway,
okay, so we're translating everything into math
in the future. Yeah, everything. So specifically, we're translating damage, and this also includes kill effects. So, for instance, I am treating Count Dooku as being like 4 damage equivalent. Again, come at me. I'm happy to change these results and see how they work.
No, I think that's fair, because I mean, I think everybody would agree that open fire is worth 4 damage, right? And even if you're attacking something that has 2 hit points, it's dealing 4 damage. So Contra, Dooku does 4 damage, arguably more because he gets around shield, but this is where you get into actual skill evaluation and discretion and nuance.
And again, we can tweak these discretion and nuance things that I'm not necessarily great at, but I'm gonna bash at the things and get them to go. So we end up getting a regression, and this is what the regression looks like. It's not that different than prior iterations on this particular regression, other than the fact that you'll notice that the prediction dots are spread more out. The reason why these prediction dots are spread more out, where previously they weren't, is because we're able to take into account more different units at a particular cost. right? Previously, we didn't care whether or not a Vanguard drew a card. Not Vanguard.
Right.
V-Wing. We didn't
Okay.
care whether or not V-Wing drew a card. It was just evaluated as a 1/1 space unit. Now it's evaluated as a 1/1 space unit that draws a card. So the dot that we're predicting to will be different than it was previously, where it was previously, okay, it's a 2-cost space unit.
Okay.
This is
So,
what we predict. Or,
but if the dots are all
1/1
spread
with
out
the stats.
more,
Yeah.
that sounds like the model's less accurate.
The prediction dots are spread out more because they're getting closer to the red dots. The red dots are the dots that are what we're actually trying to observe. These are our observations. So the blue dots are getting more spread out because the blue dots are doing a better job of matching the red dots.
Okay, that makes more sense, right? So the red dots are everywhere.
Yeah.
Because
because the units are everywhere, right? Like we have some units have lots of stats, some units have less stats, but they have a draw.
Why would you expect
some units have less stats, but they do damage?
Why is there not a singular blue dot representing the prediction? Like for a given cost, right? I'm seeing multiple blue dots for 4.
Because we are trying to predict each unit that is a 4-cost. So essentially, we're plugging in for all the 4-cost units. We're feeding in given 4-cost spacer ground arena card draw.
Oh, I see. So there's 8. So in our entire model of the
stuff.
130 units that you've plugged in, there are n number of 4-cost units.
Right.
And now please predict the range of 4-cost units if there are 12 4-cost units in reality.
Given these inputs,
hypothetical model would want to have 12 4-cost units all with the exact same stat spread because that's not reality. So the model is predicting a range of 4-cost units.
Well, it's saying like, okay, 4-cost units we're taking like a 4-cost space unit with a card draw, let's say. That will plonk a blue dot on the adjusted total stats here, pachunk.
4-cost ground with draw.
Now we compare it to what the red dot. Assuming that there is a 4-cost ground unit with draw, right? Like it's only predicting to observe observed cards.
Hold the
phone.
So you're saying it's predicting the things that exist. So we're trying to predict things.
Yes.
There are 4-cost units. There are.
Yes. There are 4-cost ground units that draw cards.
Okay, fair.
So how many stat points are we predicting?
But I guess what I'm trying to say is, it's attempting to predict.
Yeah.
There's a 5-cost ground unit that draws cards. Maybe there isn't, but is it the value? It does extrapolate.
It extrapolates. It is not. It doesn't. Yeah. It is not scoring itself against that. It's not saying like when you're trying to when you're running this regression, essentially what it's doing is trying to minimize
it will make a guess though,
trying to say
that this is what I think
it'll make a
5-cost ground unit that draws a card should have stat points, but it's not saying, it has no way of knowing if it's right or wrong, but it does have a way of knowing if say a 4-cost is right or wrong, and it can attempt to get closer.
Yes. Yeah, it can say
okay.
Yeah, exactly.
And so then the takeaway, I mean, you've used phrases like R value, and you told me there was one R value that was really good, and my understanding is R value is a determination of confidence.
Yes. R value is how linear we are, but there is a better way to evaluate that I have been holding out until now, and that is the old
you mentioned
QQ
that last
plot.
episode.
So if you will... Oh boy, did I mention the QQ plot last episode. Reading this QQ plot, we are essentially taking all of our data and we are arranging it from smallest to largest. And these sample quantiles we're taking all of, this is stats to cost, I believe, cost to stats. So we're taking all of our units. 0 is an average cost unit where average in our sample of unit costs.
0 is
-4
away from average. 0, like it is the most average. Okay.
It is the most average costed unit. That is our 0 in our sample quantile. And then when we are going down and up, what we are looking at is we are looking at our deviations away from our predictions. And what we would expect is if we were perfectly accurate, we would expect a horizontal line going from, or a diagonal line going from the bottom corner to the top corner.
That's perfect. And the more all over the place it is, the worse it is.
That's
but
perfect.
So the theoretical and the observed are tracking, and that line right there looks very pretty convincing.
It's pretty convincing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know math, but that does look close to a straight line.
There are some features. So one of the things that you want to avoid when you're looking at a QQ plot is you want to avoid two different things. So number one is like if there's systematic errors, then the dots aren't going to line up. It's not going to end up being like a diagonal line. It's going to look like shit. That's you've built a terrible model. Throw that away. But there are more subtle errors that a QQ plot is able to diagnose. And one of the things you want to look for in a QQ plot is structure. And that is if when you're looking at it with your eyes, can you see lines either vertical or horizontal? And when there are lines that are either vertical or horizontal, what that is likely meaning is that there are features in your model that are either discretized in gross ways. Discretized meaning like cost is a really problematic thing to regress about because it's very chunkily discretized, right? Like you have ones, you have twos, you have threes, you have fours, you don't have any of the intermediates. But it also can be that you are not doing a good job of capturing some underlying variance in the data.
Because you haven't inputted it, and if you had, it would match closer to that diagonal line.
In a line,
okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So the last thing that you want to look for is you want to look for bowing or flyaways. So bowing is an indication that
what is bowing?
Your
like
data
curves?
is skewed.
Those little.
Like a curve, like if it was shaped.
Well,
more
there's
like
many
a parabola
parabolas here I'm looking at,
like
from
an arc. Yeah, and that's implying that there are some skews that are taking place inside of like our sort of micro bins, and these are things that I'm going to want to try and
we'll
fix.
keep adding more inputs
the QQ
to get it
right as best we can to try and be statistically rigorous. We don't want to just like throw spaghetti at the wall. We want to look for variables that we believe will explain discrepancies between our predicted cost and our actual cost. So an example of this is like keywords, uniqueness, number of aspects. Like these are things that we know have influence, but we aren't accounting for in our model, and it's going to tend to cause.
Just so we're clear, so the
structures.
QQ plot is a way of displaying the same model.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. A QQ plot goes to it is essentially a way of displaying a model's how well the model is tracking
at a point
the
in
underlying
time,
data.
January 21st of 2024, this is the accuracy of your model.
This is one way of talking about the accuracy of my model.
And the more this little, I mean, it's pretty slanted, but it does have some curved steps in it. The closer this gets to a 45-degree line, a straight diagonal line, the more accurate the model is.
Yes. The better the model is at capturing the underlying data.
You're never going to not qualify something. Okay. I love it because I don't understand the math still, and this is a really easy.
There is a more interesting way, or a more kind of naively friendly way of talking about this, where we can look at our residuals, where essentially we're just like showing how much we're missing by on each prediction, and I will try and have that ready maybe as a mini Monday on an upcoming episode. Residuals graphs aren't hard to make, but they're less they're not as like visually easy to read.
But this is incredibly visually
sense,
easy to read.
though, but
we are just we are hoping to get this line gets flatter and flatter. And the flatter this line is, the more confidence I have when I tell people on Discord that they're wrong. Right? That's I'm just looking for the cleanest thing. We're not the
no. Yeah, let's not qualify things. Let's pedal to the metal,
We're not
baby.
the podcast
you
for
can
winning
throw
at
the
school.
QQ plot
We're
in
not the
there. Yeah.
podcast with like charismatic hosts who banter. We're the podcast if you would like to be able to tell people they're wrong with a slightly with an acceptable level of insufferability. I feel like that's the box.
Yes.
We're going
That's
for.
what
So, okay. Anything else?
I think that's the realist analysis.
We're going to keep getting realer and
Ned
flatter so I can keep getting righter and more righteous.
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. I think that's all she wrote. This was episode 7 of The Force Unlimited. And dear listener, if you have any thoughts about this episode, email us at our new email address, theforceunlimited@gmail.com. Do you have any final notes, Ned?
Yes. Yes, I do, and that is, I really wish that I had better prepared these plots because they look.
You have
shit.
4 weeks to get it in shape. Next week, we're going to have meaty, non-math conversations so I can keep up. And with that, though,
Yes.
we will see you in 2 weeks, dear listener.